Welcome to the writer reads The Strays of Lunar One, Book 1, The Unwilling, Chapter 27, A Very Messy Extraction. Lewis woke to a familiar and strangely frightening smell. He opened his eyes and his head swam. "Oh, what happened?" he asked. "Nothing yet," Caleb murmured, pulling the blanket back and holding up a lightly armoured ship suit. Lewis blinked. "We get armour?" Caleb waggled the suit back and forth. "It wasn't what I recommended, but you get armour." The world spun and Lewis didn't move. He wasn't sure he dared, but things were slowly coming into focus. "You need to get changed." Aiden's order came from somewhere beyond his vision. "Now get up." There was enough alpha in that Lewis sat up, slamming a hand into the wall for support as his head spun and he almost fell. Caleb steadied him with a firm grip on his arm and he heard Oliver groan. "Come on, up you get," came Aiden's voice, and Lewis heard Oliver stagger to his feet as he did the same. "Sands that way," Caleb directed, guiding him into the small cubicle and leaning in the open door. Lewis didn't bother asking him to turn his back. He just got changed, using the walls for support every time he swayed. It was a relief when the big guard stayed in place, even if Lewis was sure his scent was stronger than before. He sniffed. "What is that? It smells almost familiar." Caleb caught the flare of his nostrils and leaned in close. "The Sasaru are our very distant relatives." Lewis drew back, puzzlement creasing his face. "I don't understand." The man grinned, showing teeth. "Then you might get to live just a little longer." Lewis's face paled and he swallowed hard against the nameless fear of whatever lay beyond Caleb's jaws. The guard reached out and ruffled his hair. "Good wolf." Lewis skittered back until he hit the far wall of the sand. Caleb ignored him and turned away from the door. "Come on." It took Lewis a moment before he got a grip on himself, and even then he had to force himself to move forward. Caleb stepped to one side and ushered him past, and Lewis halted. "Come," Aiden ordered, and Lewis went, stepping around the oddly scented guard. Lewis caught the look the bounty hunter gave the guard, but moved up to him and stopped. Oliver was already dressed and standing facing one wall. Aiden gestured at the one opposite. "You know the drill." Lewis wanted to protest that he really didn't, but one look at Oliver and he got the idea. He moved past Aiden and faced the wall. Collar, cuffs, shackles and chains followed, and Lewis glanced at the bounty hunter. "Is all this really necessary?" he asked, and Aiden held up a gag. "Unless you want this added." Lewis wanted to ask what the man's client thought of the idea, and then decided he didn't want to give Ravelin any more ideas than they already had. He lowered his head and Aiden tucked the gag back into his pocket. "I didn't think so." Lewis waited for him to pull out hoods like the one he'd worn on his arrival, but no such garment followed. Aiden looked them over. "Those collars and cuffs are wolf resistant," he told them. "They won't expand if you try to shift, and they won't give. They will lacerate whatever is trying to expand past them, and you could end up dead or crippled, depending which part of you doesn't fit." Leaving them to digest that unwelcome piece of news, he turned to the door. "We're ready," he said, and the door slid open. Another 4 hunters coming into the cell. Lewis noted that he now had a different babysitter, and that Caleb dropped back to partner another man behind them. Of Caleb's original partner there was no sign. Not much of an improvement, he thought, and felt Oliver's silent agreement. Neither one of them liked the idea of having the whatever he was at their backs. At least they were together as they walked side by side into the corridor. Granted, they each had a guard, and there was a pair of hunters walking in front and behind them, but they weren't separated. It was an improvement, even if they were still prisoners and their lives had been sold to the highest bidder. Ravelin, Lewis thought, and felt Oliver's unease. "Yeah, they were going to let you die." "I know." They kept moving, their heads slowly clearing as they followed Buford's corridors to the departure hangar. "Did they say where the handover was going to take place?" Oliver wanted to know. "No," Lewis replied as they moved into the hangar space. "Why?" "Because we've got," was as far as Oliver got before a dozen armoured men and women moved out from behind the shuttles around them. "Oh," Lewis replied, not at all happy to find a blaster pressed into his ribs as his escort took a firm grip on his arm. He didn't try to pull away, but gave the man a worried look. "Don't worry, I've got you." Lewis wanted to say that was what he was afraid of, but didn't think it would go down well. He wondered where they kept the device needed to unlock their chains and cuffs. "Aidan has it," Oliver told him, just as a group of 4 men and women stepped forward. Uh-oh, here it comes. Lewis wished he had to ask what, but the answer was plain. "You have something that belongs to us," the leader declared. "Two somethings," his second reiterated. Somethings, Lewis thought, and Oliver shushed him. Lewis felt his alpha tense. "Get ready to hit the floor," Oliver instructed as the grip on Lewis's arm tightened. "I thought Beaufort's had policies about this kind of thing." "You'll note we're no longer under their care," Oliver pointed out. There really was nothing Lewis could say to that. "You're wrong," Aidan said in reply to the intruders. "Our catch belongs to us. It was out of your airspace and your shuttle when we found it and saved it from the local wildlife. Without us, there'd be nothing more than a missed opportunity and skin and bones in a Sasaru colony, and there would be no bounty." "A feat for which you'll be adequately compensated," their opponent replied. "But they were not yours to catch, and they are not yours to keep." "I think you'll find the law of the bounty clear on this," Aidan responded. "They were in no man's territory, and we apprehended them. Under bounty law, they belong to us." Lewis wanted to protest that he didn't belong to anyone, but his circumstances dictated otherwise. He tried to work out who would even try to claim them. "Exarch," Oliver supplied. "We were in their custody when we left, and—" His voice petered out as the mercenary leader explained it. "They had signed on as our recruits," he pointed out. "That means they are ours." Aidan chuckled. "I think the fact you were trying to sell them out at the time of their departure proves you were already in breach of that contract, which nullifies it under Hunter law." There was silence, and the merc's voice was soft with threat when he replied. "And how do you know that?" he asked. Lewis heard the smirk in Aidan's voice as he answered. "You've read our services flyer. I'm sure you can figure it out." "I'll give you to the count of 3 before we shred you and your people to get to them." Lewis heard the blaster pressing into his side, powering up. "Oh man, I only just got the last lot buffed out." Oliver shook his head. "What they're planning doesn't exactly buff. I'm not even sure being on Beaufort's will save us from this." "Most advanced medical service in the world, bro." "Medical, not miracle," Oliver reminded him. "Last I saw, there wasn't a medical center in the universe that owned a machine that could bring you back from the dead." "Are you sure?" Lewis quipped. "I mean, couldn't you look again?" Oliver chuckled. 3. "Not gonna happen, little man," Aidan growled, and Oliver and Lewis heard the sound of material tearing. The hunter beside Lewis swore. "She's gonna have his hide." Lewis wondered who, but then the female merc reacted. "Oh, for fuck's sake! Aidan!" 2. The mercenary didn't sound impressed. He didn't quite yawn, but it was there in his voice, and Lewis had no time to figure out what that meant. His guard did 2 things almost simultaneously. He yanked his blaster out of Lewis's ribs and shoved him toward the ground. "Down!" Lewis didn't think. He obeyed. As he hit the deck, the guard dropped into a crouch and reached over to grab him by the collar. Another hand beat him to it, and a less welcome voice intervened. "I've got him." "Caleb." Lewis's eyes widened in alarm, but there was nothing he could do to break the hunter's grip. Beside him, Oliver dropped to the deck, his guard pressuring him to stay low. "Don't shift. Cuffs will shred your wrists and the collar will take off your head," Oliver's guard warned, and Oliver growled in frustration. Lewis knew how he felt. There was nothing more he wanted to do right then than shift into his hybrid form. He just felt he'd have more of a chance. And the smaller wolf's form was denied him too, since a wolf's neck was much larger than a man's. That meant he couldn't try running. He crouched in the cover of the bounty hunter, now shooting into the mercenaries. "When I move, you come with me," he instructed. "Got it," Caleb confirmed, and Lewis hoped the man was going to do exactly as he said. As much as he didn't want to acknowledge it, he had a terrible feeling that Caleb was about to drag their situation even further south than it had already gone. He got the same feeling from Oliver, as well as the sense of frustration that there was very little either of them could do to stop what the man, or whatever he was was about to bring. That didn't stop him from following the draw of Caleb's hand when his escort moved them toward the cover of one of the parked shuttles. To Lewis's relief, Oliver's guard followed, and the rear escorts went with them, all four of them laying down a wall of fire to deter their attackers. Lewis was relieved to see rounds sparking off their armour and sending a ripple of blue-white light away from the impact points. Whoever they were, these hunters were very well equipped. They might get out of this yet. "Get them to the shuttle!" Aidan shouted, his roar carrying through the hangar. Lewis's escort responded immediately. "This way!" They followed his lead, the Exarch forces falling from a hail of heavy fire from one corner of the hangar. "Dipshits didn't choose their cover very well," the lead guard snickered as the Exarch people blocking their way spasmed under a hail of bullets from the side-mounted autocannons appearing in the side and nose cone of a small, sleek transport vessel. "I thought Buford had a moratorium on live weapons in the transport bays," Lewis commented. "They do," Oliver told him. "Trust me, there are going to be a lot of questions asked of everyone here, and someone isn't very happy with them." Unaware of the conversation going on between their captives, the guards kept up a steady rate of fire, getting themselves and their charges into cover. Working together, they manoeuvred Oliver and Lewis out of the main line of fire and began working their way toward the tiny transport. "Guess that was their ride," Lewis's guard noted, pointing out a larger transport standing to one side of the hangar, hatches open. No sooner had he spoken than Caleb erupted, revealing an extra set of arms and hands and two more blasters. The hunter's light armour, with its inbuilt shields, was not made to be hit with an electrical charge followed immediately by 3 heavy slugs at very close range. Lewis jerked in fright, but the grip on his collar stayed firm, yanking him back and keeping him down when he would have run. "You're not going anywhere, little man." As Oliver gaped, Caleb dropped one of his blasters and curled a hand around his collar. "And neither are you." Turning to fire into the hunters, he began dragging Oliver and Lewis toward the Exarch transport. As if his treachery was the signal they'd been waiting for, the Exarch mercenaries rapidly shifted to cover their retreat. Aidan's howl of frustration and fury could be heard over the blaster fire, but the werewolf was pinned down and half his team was dead. Lewis couldn't see what happened to the female, but if Aidan was still under cover, she'd be the only reason why. Lewis couldn't think of anything else that might stop the wolf from charging into the fray. Lewis twisted in the collar and heard the chitter of an alien voice, even as Caleb spoke in their implants. "Exarch's buyers are waiting." And they were? "Zanel wants its data back and justice served." That was more than enough for Lewis. He twisted in Caleb's hand, trying to break free, reaching out to the only person he could think of for help, Florey. "Help us!" he shouted, sending the plea down the path her incoming message had taken. "Help us!" He struggled, aware of Caleb's consternation as the whatever it was tried to keep a hold of him. "Stay with me," Oliver urged. "Stay with me. Remember, you are human." Lewis heard him, but panic rose at the thought of going back to Zanel. They'd beaten him to within an inch of his life, and he did not want to return. "Lewis, stay with me," Oliver ordered, letting just the hint of an alpha edge his words with fur. It almost worked, but then Caleb jerked them from their feet and dragged them swiftly toward the Exarch transports more. Lewis struggled to get his feet under him, only to be twisted off them by a practiced movement of the mercenary's hand. "Lewis!" Florey shouted, as the panic won and Lewis's wolf began the shift to his hybrid form. "The cuffs!" Oliver called. "And the collar. If you don't get them open, then you'll be transporting him in pieces." "Gotcha, hun," Florey replied as fur broke through Lewis's skin and his face extended into a muzzle. Lewis was only vaguely aware of Oliver's reply as his chest and shoulders expanded, ripping through the stitching of the lightly armoured suit. Pain circled his wrists and ankles as his limbs grew too large for their restraints. Breathing became difficult and the collar began to cut into his throat. More panic rippled through his brain. It made it hard to think, almost impossible to remember who he was. His wolf rose to the surface, his thoughts focused on escape and destruction. Escape from his captor's grip and destruction shortly after. "Change back!" The command roared through his skull in two voices, in two alpha voices, and Lewis's wolf hesitated. "Change back now!" The command was repeated, but the collar was cutting deeper, choking him. Bones ached as cuffs and shackles refused to give. The pain made it hard to think. Lewis scrambled to remember whatever change meant and what form he could change back to. Another scent crept through his mind, a memory, a presence, something stronger than a voice in his implant. It was accompanied by another voice, one infinitely more alluring and frightening than either of the alphas. Cat! A warm presence wound itself around him, pressing its shoulder against his. It rubbed the top of its head along his jawline, then turned its face to sink its teeth firmly into his jugular. Become a man again. The voice was soft, but commanding, and a little frightening, and Lewis's wolf welcomed it. A man? A man, the voice emphasized, and that scent enveloped him. Mountain cat, predator. We need you to be as one. But now! That was accompanied by a snarl that trickled through his skull with the implacability of a flood. The image of his human form became almost overwhelming. Well, Lewis's wolf flinched at the feline's presence, especially when it felt her jaws on his throat, slowly choking the life from him. He whined, acquiescing, bone creaking and tendons snapping. So much for Buford's repair job, he thought. They can do another, Florey told him. The attack occurred on territory they were bound to protect. They're bound to, by contract to compensate and care. Well, that's good to know, Lewis thought. The pressure on his throat eased, although he swore he felt the warm trickle of blood running down his chest. The same slick stickiness coated his wrists and ankles, but Oliver's voice was filled with relief. It's good to have you back, bro. All Lewis could do was hope he hadn't cost them too much, that there was still enough left in their account for Florey to get them out of here. Where in all the hells was that useless Odyssey agent? At least the cat had let go of his mental throat. It was still there, though, the pressure of its shoulder against his own, the warmth of its body along his side, its scent entwined around him. Lewis relaxed against it. That was all good, but Caleb was still dragging them toward the Exarch transport, and Lewis could hear its engines powering up. I'll have you loose in 3, 2, Florey began. Then, when I say run, run. 1. The collars snapped open, and shackles clattered to the floor. Run! Oliver was the first to react, but then he didn't have the distraction of a cat wound around his mind. He reached out and grabbed Lewis's arm, pulling him forward as Caleb stared at the 2 empty collars in his hands. It didn't last long. Lewis glanced back, his brain refusing to accept the nightmare that was part man, part arachnid, standing behind him. For his part, Caleb didn't take long to recover. As it discarded the empty collars, the 2 hands still holding guns brought them to bear. Down! Florey shouted, and Oliver and Lewis didn't think twice. They threw themselves to the floor just as the guns on the bounty hunter's ship spoke again. Flechettes whistled overhead, accompanied by the acrid burn of energy bolts. Lewis didn't want to know how they'd managed that particular combination. He was just glad he wasn't their target. The Exarch transport wasn't going to be flying anywhere for quite some time, and that was if it could ever be made spaceworthy again. Worse was what happened to the creature that had been Caleb. The hailstorm of solid and energy rounds had torn him apart. Pieces of carapace had been scattered across the deck, and ichor stained the space where he'd stood and the shuttle behind him. What? Lewis began, but Florey cut him off. Up! They got up, looking for somewhere to run, their gazes caught by a blonde-haired figure standing in the hatchway of the bounty hunter's transport. There's your ride, Florey told them. I'm sorry, but it's still Odyssey. That's nothing we can't deal with, Oliver told her, and she gave a bitter chuckle. That's what I told them, she said. It's not my fault if they didn't listen. Behind them, blaster fire renewed as the Exarch team tried to reach an entry into the rest of the medical complex, and more of Aiden's people arrived in the hangar. Gabe jumped out of the shuttle and ran toward Oliver and Lewis. You know this man? Oliver asked. He's Odyssey's man, come to get us out, Lewis told him, just as the faint scent of lavender reached him. That shit never scrubs out. Oliver laughed as Gabe reached them. That's our ride, he told them, pointing at Aiden's ship. I'm flying. Sounds like a plan, Oliver told him as he and Lewis followed him into the shuttle. Gabe waited just long enough to see them on board. I spoke to Buford's, he told them as the hangar came alive with the amber and red warning lights of a pending launch. The low, repetitive blare of a klaxon reverberated through the passenger compartment. They apologise. They have one free treatment with all the security necessary should you ever need their care. Does it come with extraction to get us there? Lewis asked, and Gabe froze. I'll ask. Later, when we're clear. We can't stay here now. He settled into the cockpit, and Oliver and Lewis followed, dropping into the co-pilot's chair and a spare jump seat, respectively. They stayed silent as Gabe spoke to the controllers. Buford's, this is Odyssey Blue, ready to fly. Odyssey Blue, you are cleared for takeoff. Came back. Get them off our station, and Godspeed. I dumped the hunters into stasis, he told Oliver and Lewis, his hands moving over the controls. They felt the ship lift as he continued. I figured we could give them back when we return the ship. He gave Oliver and Lewis an ironic smile. We'll even compensate them for the unlawful borrow. His hands moved over the controls and the shuttle lifted smoothly, executing a tight turn and dropping out of the facility that was Buford's Medical. He sighed. My bosses aren't going to be very happy with me, he admitted. This was not the cleanest of extractions.